Dust caked the hem of a dress that had survived 3 brutal winters, clinging to a woman society had already discarded. Evelyn Gallagher was starving, exhausted, and heavier than the cruel townsfolk deemed acceptable. She came begging for scraps. Instead, the wealthiest man in the territory offered her his name. The Colorado sun in the late summer of 1881 was unforgiving, beating down on the bustling, dirt-packed streets of Oakhaven like a blacksmith's hammer. For Evelyn Gallagher, every step was a calculated exertion. She was a woman of substantial size, carrying a heavy frame that had always made her the target of whispers and cruel jokes. In her youth, she had been called sturdy. As she aged into her late 20s, destitute and orphaned, the townspeople's words had turned far less kind. Her dress, a faded, patchworked monstrosity of brown calico, clung to her damp skin. The rough fabric chafed against her thighs with every agonizing step. She had not eaten a proper meal in 3 days, surviving on windfalls from the apple orchard on the edge of town. Her boots were worn completely through the soles, wrapping her bruised, blistered feet in little more than frayed leather. Evelyn stopped in front of the town's premier establishment, the Silver Lode Hotel, clutching a crumpled piece of paper she had found tacked to the community board. They needed a laundress. She wiped the sweat from her brow with a trembling, calloused hand, took a deep breath, and pushed through the heavy wooden doors. "I'm here about the washing," Evelyn said, her voice soft but steady, addressing the manager, a wiry man named Horace Higgins. Horace looked up from his ledger, his eyes raking over her large, ragged form, his nose wrinkled in blatant disgust. "The job requires stamina, Miss Gallagher. Not to be blunt, but looking at the sheer bulk of you, I doubt you could haul a basket of wet linens from the river without collapsing. Besides, we cater to high-class clientele. I can't have you sweating over their silk shirts. Be on your way." The rejection hit her like a physical blow, adding to the dozen others she had endured that week. Seamstress, cook, floor sweeper, no one wanted her. They saw only her size and her poverty, equating her weight with laziness, despite the fact that she possessed the strength of an ox and a work ethic forged in the fires of desperation. Forcing back tears of humiliation, Evelyn retreated back into the blinding sunlight. She walked blindly toward the mercantile, leaning against the wooden hitching post to catch her breath. Her stomach gave a violent, hollow cramp. She was dangerously close to the end of her rope. Suddenly, a sharp, terrified shriek pierced the afternoon lull. Evelyn turned heavily to see a chaotic scene unfolding near the mercantile's loading dock. A massive, feral-looking stray dog, half-wolf by the looks of its matted fur and bared teeth, had cornered 2 small girls in lace-trimmed, expensive dresses. The girls, no older than 7 and 5, were backed against a stack of feed barrels, trembling violently. Standing a safe 10 yards away was a young, sharply dressed woman, their nanny. Evelyn presumed, screaming uselessly, "Shoo! Get away, you beast! Someone shoot it!" The dog lunged, snapping its jaws. The younger girl let out a high-pitched wail, covering her eyes. Without a single thought for her own safety, Evelyn's maternal instincts, a reservoir of untapped, fierce love she had harbored all her life, took over. She moved with a speed that defied her large frame. Grabbing a heavy wooden broom from the mercantile porch, she threw herself between the vicious stray and the terrified children. "Get back!" Evelyn roared, her voice booming with an authority that shocked even herself. She brought the broom handle down hard against the wooden dock, creating a sharp crack. The dog snapped at her skirts, tearing a chunk of the ragged calico, its teeth grazing her heavy calf. Evelyn didn't flinch. She used her substantial bulk as an impenetrable wall of flesh and bone, shielding the small girls completely from the animal. She stomped her heavy boot against the planks, raising the broom again. I said, "Get." Startled by her sheer size, the booming noise, and her utter lack of fear, the dog tucked its tail and bolted down the alleyway. Evelyn dropped the broom, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She turned around, dropping slowly to her knees, groaning as her joints protested the movement. The 2 little girls were huddled together, wide-eyed and shaking. "It's all right," Evelyn murmured, her voice instantly transforming from a roar to a soothing, honeyed whisper. She extended her large, scarred hands, palms up. "The bad dog is gone, sweetings. You're safe now." The younger one, a girl with messy dark curls, didn't hesitate. She threw herself into Evelyn's massive soft chest, burying her face in the dusty, patched fabric of her dress. Evelyn instinctively wrapped her thick arms around the child, rocking her gently. The older girl, holding a torn rag doll, stepped closer and leaned against Evelyn's shoulder, seeking the comforting warmth of her large presence. "Well, really, let go of them, you filthy woman." The nanny finally marched over, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. She reached down, trying to pry the children away from Evelyn. "Come here, Abigail! Clara! Do you know what kind of diseases this beggar might have?" The girls screamed silently, clinging to Evelyn with white-knuckled grips, refusing to let go. "They're just scared, miss," Evelyn said softly, keeping her arms protectively around the children. "Give them a moment to catch their breath." "I am their governess, and I am giving you an order," the nanny shrieked. "You were their governess." A deep, gravelly voice echoed like thunder across the wooden boardwalk. Evelyn looked up. Pushing through the gathering crowd was a man who seemed entirely too large for the town. Josiah Whitmore stood 6'4", with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. He was a man of immense wealth, having struck the richest silver vein in the territory 5 years ago, but he dressed like the rugged mountain man he was at heart, a worn canvas duster, a dark Stetson pulled low over piercing, icy blue eyes, and leather boots caked in mountain mud. The crowd parted for him instantly. Josiah Whitmore owned half of Oakhaven and all of the timber rights in the surrounding mountains. "Mr. Whitmore!" The nanny gasped, instantly smoothing her skirts. "Sir, I was just trying to keep them safe. But this vagrant interfered. I saw the whole thing from the bank window." "Miss Higgins," Josiah said, his voice deadly quiet, "you stood a mile away screeching while a mutt nearly tore my daughters to ribbons. This woman put herself between my blood and a set of teeth. Pack your bags. Your wages will be waiting at the estate. Don't be there when I get home." The nanny burst into tears and fled. Josiah knelt down in the dust, his large frame mirroring Evelyn's. He looked at his daughters, who were still fiercely clinging to the large, ragged woman. Abigail and Clara hadn't spoken a single word in 14 months, not since the day their mother died. Josiah lived in a constant state of agonizing helplessness regarding his children. Yet here they were, seeking refuge in the arms of a stranger. Josiah's piercing blue eyes shifted to Evelyn. He took in her frayed clothes, the exhaustion etched deep in the lines of her face, and her sheer, undeniable size. He saw the way she held his girls, not with hesitation, but with a fierce, protective maternal grace. "I need a job, sir," Evelyn blurted out, the words tumbling from her cracked lips before she could stop them. The desperation of hunger stripped away her pride. "I'll clean, I'll cook, I'll haul water. I am strong, Mr. Whitmore. I know folks look at my size and think I'm lazy, but I swear to you, I'll work myself to the bone, just for a roof and some scraps. Let me look after the girls." Josiah studied her face. He saw the intelligence in her dark eyes, the pride she was sacrificing to beg, and the gentle way she was stroking Clara's hair. "Stand up, miss." "Gallagher. Evelyn Gallagher," she whispered, her face flushing red with shame. "Stand up, Miss Gallagher," Josiah commanded softly. He reached out a large, leather-gloved hand. Evelyn hesitated, then placed her hand in his. He pulled her to her feet with shocking ease. The girls immediately grabbed fistfuls of Evelyn's ragged skirt. "My carriage is at the end of the street," Josiah said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We're going to the magistrate's office. Then we are going home." "The magistrate?" Evelyn asked, bewildered, her heavy chest heaving. "But sir, I just asked for work in your household." "I don't need a servant, Miss Gallagher," Josiah said, his blue eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. I need a wife." The ride up the winding, perilous mountain road to the Whitmore estate at Pine Ridge passed in a stunned silence. The carriage was lined with crushed velvet, a luxury Evelyn had never dared to touch, let alone sit upon. She perched rigidly on the edge of the seat, acutely aware of the dust and grime she was transferring to the immaculate cushions, desperately trying to make herself look smaller. Opposite her sat Josiah, watching her with an unreadable expression. Abigail and Clara had insisted on sitting on either side of Evelyn, their small, delicate hands resting on her wide thighs. When they arrived at the estate, Evelyn's jaw dropped. It was a sprawling 3-story mansion, constructed of massive dark timber and native stone, perched on a cliff that overlooked a sea of evergreen trees. It was a fortress of wealth. As Josiah led them through the heavy oak doors, the grand foyer echoed with their footsteps. Almost immediately, a sharp, angular woman in a severe black dress descended the sweeping staircase. This was Agatha Gable, the head housekeeper. She ruled the estate with an iron fist while Josiah was away at the logging camps. Mrs. Gable's eyes widened as she took in the sight of Josiah, the girls, and finally Evelyn. Her gaze swept over Evelyn's large, mud-stained frame, her lip curling in undisguised revulsion. "Mr. Whitmore," Mrs. Gable said, her voice dripping with thinly veiled contempt. "You have returned early, and you have brought a stray?" Evelyn flinched, instinctively pulling her ragged shawl tighter around her broad shoulders. She was used to the cruelty, but it always stung. "Mind your tongue, Mrs. Gable," Josiah snapped, the timbre of his voice echoing off the stone walls. "This is Miss Evelyn Gallagher. Have a bath drawn in the master suite immediately, and find something suitable for her to wear, even if you have to piece together 3 of your own dresses to do it." Mrs. Gable gasped, her face turning a mottled red. "The master suite? Sir, she is covered in filth. She'll ruin the linens. She is my wife," Josiah stated flatly. The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Gable looked as though she had been struck by lightning. Evelyn, too, was trembling, the reality of the signature she had just placed on the marriage license in town finally settling into her bones. Josiah dismissed the sputtering housekeeper with a wave of his hand and led Evelyn into his private study, closing the heavy mahogany doors behind them. The room smelled of pipe tobacco, aged paper, and cedar. "Sit," he offered, gesturing to a massive leather armchair. Evelyn lowered her heavy frame into the chair, staring at her dirt-caked boots. "Mr. Whitmore, I don't understand. I am a fat, destitute woman from the gutter. You are the richest man in the county. You could have any polished, refined woman from Denver to Boston. Why did you marry me?" Josiah poured 2 glasses of amber whiskey, handing one to her before leaning against his heavy desk. "My first wife, Josephine, was a polished, refined woman from Boston," Josiah began, his voice laced with old bitterness. "She was beautiful, thin, elegant, and she despised every breath she took in this mountain air. She despised me, but more than anything, she resented the girls. To her, they were a burden that ruined her figure and her social life." Evelyn took a sip of the whiskey, the liquid fire burning away some of the chill in her bones. She listened intently. 14 months ago, Josephine died in a carriage accident on the mountain pass. Josiah continued, his eyes darkening. "Since that day, Abigail and Clara haven't spoken a single word. They have night terrors. They flinch when doors slam. I've hired 6 nannies in a year. Some quit because the girls are difficult. Some I fired because I caught them raising a hand to my daughters. I am gone weeks at a time managing the timber camps. I need someone here who will protect them." "I could have done that as a nanny," Evelyn argued softly. "Why the ring?" Josiah reached into a drawer and pulled out a stack of legal documents, tossing them onto the desk. "Because of Josephine's family, the Caldwells. They are old money, vicious, and deeply connected. Her brother, Gideon Caldwell, has filed a petition in federal court to take custody of the girls. He claims that a wild bachelor mountain man is unfit to raise 2 traumatized little girls. And in the eyes of the law, he's right. If I remain unmarried, the judge will grant him custody in 3 months. and Gideon will drag my daughters to a miserable boarding school in Massachusetts while seizing their inheritance." He looked directly at Evelyn, his gaze softening slightly. "I saw the way you shielded them today. You didn't know them, yet you were willing to take a bite from a feral dog to keep them safe. You didn't flinch. I need a mother for them, Evelyn. A wife on paper, to satisfy the courts and send the Caldwells packing. In return, you will never go hungry again. You will have a warm bed, fine clothes, and the respect of my household. I will not demand marital duties from you. It is a partnership of convenience." Evelyn looked down at her hands, the thick fingers scarred from years of manual labor. She had spent her entire life invisible, or worse, visible only to be mocked for her size. She had never known the gentle touch of a man, never allowed herself to dream of a family because society had told her she was too grotesque to deserve one. Yet here was a man offering her a sanctuary, not because of her looks, but because of her heart. "You really think I can be what they need?" she asked, her voice cracking with vulnerable emotion. "I know you can," Josiah said firmly. "The real question is, can you bear the weight of my name? Because when the Caldwells come, they will not play fair. They will try to tear you down." Evelyn lifted her chin, a spark of long-buried pride igniting in her dark eyes. "Mr. Whitmore, I have been torn down by folks in this town since I was 12 years old. I am built to carry heavy things." A ghost of a smile touched Josiah's lips. "I believe you are, Mrs. Whitmore." The transition from town beggar to the Lady of Pine Ridge was a jarring, often painful process. Evelyn was given full reign of the master suite, a room larger than any house she had ever lived in. But the true battle began the next morning when the town's premier seamstress, Madame Villette, was summoned to the estate. Mrs. Gable ushered the small, sharp-featured Frenchwoman into Evelyn's chambers. Madame Villette took one look at Evelyn, who was awkwardly clutching a silk bedsheet around her large frame, and let out an exaggerated sigh. "Mon Dieu," Villette muttered, her tape measure dangling from her fingers. "It will take 10 yards of silk just to cover the bodice." "I am a seamstress, Mrs. Gable, not a tent maker." Evelyn's face burned with familiar, agonizing shame. She squeezed her eyes shut, ready to endure the humiliation she had faced 1,000 times before. Suddenly, the heavy bedroom door swung open. Josiah stood in the threshold, his presence instantly dominating the room. He had heard the remark from the hallway. "Madame Villette," Josiah said, his voice dangerously calm as he stepped into the room. "You are looking at my wife." The seamstress paled, stammering. "Monsieur Whitmore, I only meant the fabric required. You will use the finest silks, the softest wools, and the most exquisite lace you possess," Josiah interrupted, walking over to stand directly beside Evelyn, placing a heavy, reassuring hand on her broad shoulder. The warmth of his touch sent a shockwave through her body. "You will craft dresses that flatter her, that honor her, and if I ever hear a word of disrespect fall from your lips again regarding my wife's size or her station, I will buy the building your shop sits on and burn it to the ground. Do we understand one another?" "Yes, sir. Perfectly, sir," the seamstress squeaked, immediately rushing forward with her tape measure, her hands trembling. Evelyn looked up at Josiah, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. No one, not in her entire life, had ever defended her dignity. Josiah gave her shoulder one last gentle squeeze before turning and leaving the room. Over the next month, life at Pine Ridge settled into a fragile rhythm. Josiah departed for the logging camps, leaving Evelyn alone with the girls and a hostile staff. Mrs. Gable did everything in her power to undermine Evelyn, assigning her complicated menus she knew Evelyn couldn't pronounce, and instructing the maids to ignore her requests. But Evelyn didn't fight back with cruelty. She fought back with labor. When the cook refused to prepare breakfast, Evelyn, well-versed in survival, descended into the kitchens. She tied an apron over her new, beautiful emerald green dress, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. She began baking. She used her late Irish grandmother's recipes, kneading heavy dough with her strong, capable hands. The scent of cinnamon, brown sugar, and warm yeast drifted through the cold stone halls of the mansion. It drew Abigail and Clara out of their rooms. They stood in the kitchen doorway, peering in like frightened fawns. "Come in, sweetings," Evelyn said cheerfully, dusting flour off her massive apron. "We've got dough to roll. I find that when the world is too heavy, punching some bread dough makes it feel a little lighter. Want to try?" She didn't push them to talk. She didn't hover. She simply dragged a heavy wooden stool to the counter and waited. Slowly, Clara approached, climbing onto the stool. Evelyn handed her a lump of dough. Soon, Abigail joined them. For 3 hours, the kitchen was filled with the sound of small fists thumping dough, and for the first time in a year, the sound of children giggling. Evelyn became their sanctuary. She read to them in a soft, rumbling voice that vibrated comfortably in her large chest when they leaned against her. She didn't care if they dirtied her new dresses. Her lap was always open. However, the shadows of the estate were deep. One rainy afternoon, while cleaning out a dusty wardrobe in the attic to make a play space for the girls, Evelyn discovered a false bottom in a leather trunk. Inside was a bundle of letters tied with a black ribbon, written in elegant, looping cursive. They belonged to Josephine, Josiah's late wife. Evelyn sat on the floor, reading them by the dim light of a lantern. Her blood ran cold. The letters were addressed to a man in Boston, not her brother, Gideon, but a lover. "I cannot bear the stench of the pines any longer, nor the brutish boar that is my husband," one letter read. "Gideon is arriving next month to help me secure the funds from Josiah's safe. Once I have the silver certificates, I will leave the 2 wretched clinging brats behind. They are his problem. We will be in Paris by Christmas," Evelyn gasped, dropping the letter. Josephine hadn't just been unhappy. She had been planning to rob Josiah blind and abandon her own children. But what chilled Evelyn to the bone was the date on the final letter. It was dated the very day Josephine had died in the carriage accident. Had she been fleeing? Had Gideon been involved? Before Evelyn could process the discovery, a loud commotion erupted downstairs. She shoved the letters into her deep pockets and hurried down the sweeping staircase. In the grand foyer stood Mrs. Gable, looking triumphant, alongside a tall, impeccably dressed man with a cruel, sharp face. Beside him stood the local sheriff. "Where is the master of the house?" the man demanded, knocking his silver-tipped cane against the stone floor. "Mr. Whitmore is in the mountains, Mr. Caldwell," Mrs. Gable said eagerly. "But the new Mrs. Whitmore is here." Gideon Caldwell looked up as Evelyn descended the stairs. His eyes swept over her large, imposing figure, his lip curling into a sneer of absolute revulsion. "Good God," Gideon laughed, a harsh, scraping sound. "I heard Josiah had lost his mind and married a beggar, but I assumed it was a joke. He actually married the town fat woman to secure his estate? How utterly pathetic." Evelyn's heart hammered in her broad chest, but she drew herself up to her full height. She was a massive woman, and she used every inch of her presence as she stepped between Gideon and the hallway that led to the girls' playroom. "You are trespassing in my home, Mr. Caldwell," Evelyn said, her voice steady and deep. "State your business and leave." "Your home?" Gideon mocked, stepping closer, trying to intimidate her. But Evelyn didn't yield an inch. "I am here for my nieces. The judge in Denver signed the preliminary order this morning. Until a full hearing determines the validity of this circus act of a marriage, the girls are to be placed in my temporary custody." He waved a piece of paper in her face. "Sheriff, collect the children." The sheriff looked apologetic but moved toward the stairs. "No," Evelyn commanded. She stepped directly into the sheriff's path, her wide frame blocking the stairs entirely. "Move aside, you ridiculous cow," Gideon hissed, stepping forward to push her. As his hand darted out, the heavy front doors burst open behind him with a crash that rattled the windows. Josiah Whitmore stood in the doorway, soaked in rain, holding a double-barreled shotgun pointed squarely at the marble floor. His icy blue eyes were alight with a murderous rage. "Touch my wife, Gideon. Josiah growled, cocking the hammers with a deafening double click, and they'll be burying you in a box the size of a matchbook. The grand foyer of the Whitmore estate grew so quiet that the only sound was the rain lashing against the leaded glass windows. Josiah's heavy leather boots left muddy tracks on the imported marble as he stepped fully into the hall, the twin barrels of his shotgun unwavering. Sheriff Thomas Miller, a man who had known Josiah for 10 years, raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Now, Josiah, put the gun down. You can't threaten an officer of the law, and you certainly can't shoot a man over a temporary custody order signed by Judge Horace Pendleton in Denver." "I am not threatening the law, Tom," Josiah said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He didn't take his eyes off Gideon Caldwell, whose pale face had broken out in a sheen of terrified sweat. "I am defending my home from a trespasser who has come to steal my flesh and blood." "Steal?" Gideon scoffed, finding a shred of his arrogant courage. "Josephine was my sister. I am simply rescuing her daughters from a feral mountain man and his oversized mail-order bride. The law is on my side." Evelyn stood on the third step, her massive frame effectively acting as a barricade between the men below and the hallway above. Her heart thudded wildly against her ribs, but the paralyzing shame that usually accompanied insults about her size was entirely gone. In its place burned a fierce, maternal inferno. "The law might be on your side, Mr. Caldwell," Evelyn's voice boomed, deep and resonant, commanding the attention of every soul in the room. "But the truth certainly isn't." She reached deep into the pocket of her emerald green skirt and pulled out the bundle of letters she had found in the attic. The black ribbon fluttered as she untied it with steady, thick fingers. "What is that?" Mrs. Gable sneered from the corner, though her voice shook. "More of your gutter trash, beggar woman?" "Silence, Agatha," Josiah snapped, his gaze flickering to his wife. "Evelyn, what do you have there?" "I was cleaning the attic to make a playroom for the girls," Evelyn explained, her dark eyes locking onto Gideon. "I found a leather trunk with a false bottom. Inside were letters belonging to your late wife, Josiah. Drafts of letters she sent to a man in Boston. And letters she received in return from her brother." Gideon's face drained of all color. "That is a lie. Those are forgeries. Sheriff, confiscate those." "I wouldn't take another step, Gideon," Josiah warned, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Read them, Evelyn." Evelyn unfolded the top parchment. "This one is dated exactly 1 week before the carriage accident that took her life. It reads, "My dearest brother, the arrangements are nearly complete. Josiah keeps the bulk of the silver certificates in the First National Bank of Denver, but he keeps the bearer bonds in the estate safe. I have secured the combination. Arrive on the 14th. Once we have the funds, we will leave the 2 wretched brats behind. They are his problem. We will be in Paris by Christmas." A collective gasp echoed in the room. Even Sheriff Miller looked violently ill. "She was leaving," Evelyn continued, her voice softening as she looked at Josiah, seeing the absolute shock and heartbreak in his icy blue eyes. "She wasn't on that mountain pass to go shopping in Denver, Josiah. She was fleeing with your money, and she was abandoning Abigail and Clara." "Lies!" Gideon shrieked, lunging toward the stairs. Josiah didn't shoot. Instead, he swung the heavy wooden stock of the shotgun, catching Gideon squarely in the jaw. The sharp crack of bone echoed loudly, and the wealthy Bostonian crumpled to the marble floor in a groaning, pathetic heap. Sheriff Miller didn't even blink at the assault. He walked over to the stairs and gently took the letters from Evelyn's hands. He read through 3 of them, his jaw tightening. "Judge Pendleton signed that custody order under the pretense that you were a concerned, grieving uncle, Mr. Caldwell," the sheriff said in disgust, looking down at the bleeding man. "But these letters prove conspiracy to commit grand larceny, fraud, and child abandonment. If you take those girls, you secure the Whitmore inheritance you and your sister tried to steal. You can't prove she wrote them," Gideon sputtered, spitting blood onto the pristine floor. "The handwriting is a perfect match to the letters she sent the town council," Sheriff Miller replied coldly. He hauled Gideon to his feet by the collar of his expensive coat. "Mr. Caldwell, you are under arrest for conspiracy and attempted wire fraud. We'll let the federal magistrate sort you out." As the sheriff dragged a protesting Gideon out into the pouring rain, the heavy oak doors slamming shut behind them, an eerie quiet descended upon the foyer once more. Mrs. Gable, realizing the tide had irrevocably turned, pasted a nervous, trembling smile onto her angular face. She took a step toward Evelyn. "Well, thank heavens that dreadful man is gone. Mrs. Whitmore, shall I have the kitchen prepare some tea to calm our nerves?" "Pack your bags, Agatha," Josiah interrupted, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. He broke open the shotgun, removing the shells, and set the weapon on a side table. "Sir?" Mrs. Gable gasped, clutching her chest. "I have served this house for 5 years. You just attempted to hand my daughters over to a man who called my wife a cow in her own home," Josiah said, his eyes burning with a cold fire as he looked at the housekeeper. "You have exactly 1 hour to gather your belongings and walk down this mountain. If you are still on my property when the grandfather clock strikes 4, I will let the hounds loose." Sobbing hysterically, Mrs. Gable hiked up her skirts and fled toward the servants' quarters. Evelyn sagged against the wooden banister, suddenly feeling the immense weight of her own body and the adrenaline leaving her veins. She took a shuddering breath, staring down at the muddy floor, waiting for the anger Josiah must surely feel about his late wife's betrayal to erupt. Instead, she heard the heavy, slow footsteps of her husband ascending the stairs. Josiah stopped 1 step below Evelyn, bringing his face level with hers. For a long moment, he just looked at her. He looked at the wild strands of dark hair escaping her bun, the flush of exertion on her cheeks, and the absolute, unyielding strength in her broad shoulders. "You stood between my girls and a rabid dog," Josiah whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "And today, you stood between our family and a monster." "I told you I was built to carry heavy things, Mr. Whitmore," Evelyn replied softly, though a tear finally escaped, carrying the tracking through the dust on her cheek. Before Josiah could speak, a tiny, hesitant sound came from the landing above them. Evelyn and Josiah both looked up. Standing in the shadows were Abigail and Clara. They had crept out of their playroom and witnessed the entire confrontation. Clara, the younger girl, was clutching the wooden railing, her knuckles white. Evelyn immediately moved up the stairs, her large frame moving with surprising grace. She dropped heavily to her knees on the landing, opening her wide, comforting arms. Clara ran. She slammed into Evelyn's soft chest, wrapping her small arms around the woman's thick neck. "You didn't let him take us," Clara whispered. The sound of the child's voice, scratchy from a year of disuse, fragile and tiny, shook the very foundations of the house. Josiah gasped, his hand flying to his mouth, tears instantly pooling in his icy blue eyes. "I'm right here, sweetings," Evelyn choked out, weeping openly as she buried her face in Clara's dark curls. "I will never let anyone take you. You are mine to protect." Abigail walked over slowly, tears streaming down her own face, and wrapped her arms around Evelyn from behind, burying her face in the woman's broad, warm back. "Thank you, Mama," the older girl rasped. Josiah sank onto the top step, burying his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with silent, overwhelming sobs of relief. The heavy curse that had haunted Pine Ridge for 14 months was finally broken. Later that evening, after the girls had eaten a massive dinner of Evelyn's homemade stew and been tucked into their beds talking happily about the bread they would bake tomorrow, Evelyn sat at the vanity in the master suite, brushing out her long, dark hair. The door clicked open, and Josiah stepped inside. He had washed the mud from his face and changed into a clean linen shirt, though he still looked every inch the rugged, untamed mountain man. He walked up behind her, watching her reflection in the mirror. Evelyn instinctively shrank a little, acutely aware of how much space she took up on the delicate velvet stool. "I'm sorry about Josephine's letters," Evelyn said quietly, staring at her own lap. "I know it must be a terrible pain to know she didn't love you." Josiah placed his large, calloused hands on her wide shoulders. his thumbs gently stroking the tense muscles of her neck. Josephine was a ghost I was holding on to out of guilt. Today you set me free, Evelyn. You gave me my daughters back. You gave them their voices. It was a partnership of convenience, Evelyn reminded him, though her voice trembled. I just did what I promised. I kept them safe. I am a fool, Josiah murmured, leaning down so his cheek brushed against her hair. I brought you here thinking I was rescuing a poor, unfortunate woman to serve a purpose. But you rescued us. You brought warmth back into this stone tomb. Evelyn closed her eyes, the familiar sting of insecurity rising. Josiah, please, do not mock me. I know what I am. I am a fat, plain woman. You don't have to pretend to want me to keep me here. Josiah turned her gently by the shoulders, forcing her to stand and face him. He looked down at her, his blue eyes blazing with a fierce, absolute sincerity that stole the breath from her lungs. Do not ever speak of my wife that way, Josiah commanded softly, his hands moving to cup her full cheeks, wiping away a stray tear with his thumb. I spent my life with a woman who was thin, delicate, and entirely hollow inside. I look at you, Evelyn, and I see a queen. I see a woman whose heart is as grand and magnificent as her presence. Every inch of you is a testament to the strength it took to survive in a world that didn't deserve you. Evelyn let out a shattered little gasp, her hands coming up to grip his wrists. Josiah, I don't want a partnership on paper anymore, he whispered, leaning in closer, the heat of his skin radiating against hers. I want my wife. I want the mother of my children. I want you, Evelyn Gallagher Whitmore, just as you are. For the first time in her 28 years, Evelyn didn't feel too big. She felt perfectly, wonderfully enough. She leaned up, and as Josiah's lips met hers firm, warm, and tasting of deep, abiding reverence, the cold, hungry beggar woman of Oakhaven faded into memory. She was the lady of Pine Ridge, and she had finally found a love big enough to hold her. Evelyn went from begging for scraps to becoming the fierce protector of the Whitmore legacy. Her courage didn't just save the girls from a cruel uncle, it healed a broken family and earned her a passionate, unconditional love she never thought possible. Everyone deserves a love that sees their true worth. If Evelyn's inspiring journey of strength, motherhood, and romance touched your heart, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more incredible real-life stories.
Hi, my name is Prairie Rose, the owner and manager of Obese Girl, Oregon. After watching the video, she begged for work in rags, but the rich mountain man asked, "Will you be the mother my girls need? I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel?" For me, this story was a gentle reminder that compassion and character often matter far more than someone's circumstances. Sometimes the most meaningful connections begin when we choose to see the person behind the struggle instead of making quick judgments. What moment touched you the most, and why? Have you ever seen someone's kindness change the direction of another person's life? Maybe this story encourages us to offer a little more understanding and give people the chance to show who they truly are. If it meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoy stories like this, feel free to like or subscribe.